Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Founder Spirit podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Wu. In this podcast series, I interview exceptional individuals from all over the world with the Founder Spirit, ranging from social entrepreneurs, tech founders, to philanthropists, elite athletes, and more. Together, we'll uncover not only how they managed to succeed in face of multiple challenges, but also who they are as people and their human story.
And I was really understanding myself as part of a planet, of Gaia, of life, of a web of life. For me, it was both personal and ontological to really connect with Gaia and the Gaia hypothesis. It was as if I'd tuned into the frequency of radio dial of the Amazon rainforest, the frequency of the Amazon. It had been a direct connect with my psyche, with my heart. What we're seeing is that the Amazon is actually pumping, cycling, circulating, cooling, driving rain. So the Amazon rainforest is the heart of the hydrological, climatic system of our planet. The Amazon is in a downward spiral. It's beginning to collapse. We're at a tipping point of no return. We thought it might be 10 or 15 years off, but it's actually happening now. We could lose as much as 70% of the Amazon, but the point of no return is now. That's why we have to reverse the current trend. Ultimately, we have less than 5 years to do this. Life is sacred. Gaia is alive. We are part of her. We are not fighting for nature. We are nature fighting for itself.
Joining us today is the trailblazing Atossa Soltani, founder and board president of Amazon Watch, a nonprofit organization founded in 1996 to protect the rainforest and advance the rights of indigenous peoples in the Amazon basin. A native of Iran, she's currently the director of global strategy at Amazon Sacred Headwaters, an alliance of 30 indigenous nations to permanently protect 86 million acres of rainforest in the most biologically diverse ecosystem on Earth. For the last 3 decades, Atossa has been leading global campaigns that resulted in groundbreaking victories for rainforest protection, indigenous land rights, and corporate accountability. Recipient of Hillary Institute's Global Laureate for Climate Leadership, she has brought to light human rights abuses and environmental disasters caused by extractive industries. A skilled strategist and storyteller, she is also the producer of a feature-length documentary called The Flow, about the art of aligning with nature's ways. Just how did Atossa become a leading voice in protecting the Amazon rainforest and defending the rights of its indigenous population? Well, let's talk to her and find out. Hello, Atossa. Welcome to the Founder Spirit podcast. So wonderful to have you with us today, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's great to be with you today.
Atossa, growing up in Iran, I was wondering if you could share with us some of your formative experiences.
Well, as it relates to protecting the Amazon, one of my earliest memories was when I was 11. And my father, he loved to travel. He loved adventure. He passed away a few years ago. But when we were kids, many weekends he would pick us up from school and we go straight to the Caspian Sea over the mountains that between Tehran and the Caspian Sea. And there, a few times when I was 11, we stopped in the cloud forest. Basically, Iran's lost 98% of its original forests. So there were literally just little remnants on the way to the Caspian Sea that we would occasionally picnic at. And this cloud forest, it just felt like something from a fairy tale. And I remember very distinctly climbing the trees and hanging out in the mist. And even though my family was just over there, you couldn't see them because I was surrounded in the cloud forest in the mist. And I felt like I was in just a magical realm. And I think that was one of my earliest connections to the magic of forests, which exists all over the planet. And, our lungs breathe in oxygen and breathe out CO2. And, trees are like the upside down lungs that are breathing in CO2 and breathing out oxygen. So, yeah, that was one of my earliest memories.
There's definitely magic in nature. At age 13, you left Iran and came to the U.S. seeking political asylum. This was around the time of the Iranian Revolution that culminated in the overthrow of the Shah in 1979. And in what way did witnessing this event impact your outlook on life?
When I was 13, there were basically street protests, martial law, curfew, street protests that were being retaliated by the armed forces. I was in eighth grade. We would be in the schoolyard with the older kids protesting, and then the military would come and start tear gassing us, and kids would disperse into the streets, into the mayhem. And then it was chaos. And then school would shut down. There was curfew where you had to be in your house by 7 p.m. or risk being arrested or shot. There were street protests that were defying those, and there was gunfire. You could hear it from my house. And so there was all of that mayhem. And it was basically stepping into adulthood, right from 13 into 30, just I'm trying to understand what's happening. And so I think that was one of the things that woke me up to politics, to world affairs. And the other was when my parents actually put me on a plane where my uncle and aunt were flight attendants, and I was shipped off by myself to New York. And then they left me in New York, and I had to actually get to Ohio by myself. And I remember that journey being a journey of adventure. I wasn't afraid. I was more like excited about what was next. The idea that I would leave that situation and find better fortune for my life. I was very grateful and excited. And that was the other moment that I think was important, that I made that journey into the unknown. It's been a pattern in my life, the journey into the unknown, where you invite the uncertainty and the not knowing what's going to happen, but you have a sense of positive excitement. That's kind of my upbringing. I think politically, I realized people power mattered, that people could organize in a very short time, topple a monarchy that had been around for more than 50 years.
Yeah.
The idea that we can collectively organize and have power was something that really influenced me from that age. And of course, we don't always get the best outcome when we do topple those monarchs, and that was the other lesson. Just because we are rebelling against something we don't want doesn't necessarily mean we invite what we do want. And I do believe that there was a lot of division at the time. It was a moment where a lot of people wanted democracy. A lot of people wanted human rights. And what ended up happening is they toppled the monarchy and got a fundamental Islamic regime that was just as bad on human rights and worse on women's rights. And although it stood up to the West and tried to do things in a bold, different way, it missed the mark on the things that were the aspirations to have a free, democratic, safe existence in peace. And so that's the lessons I would say from the Iranian Revolution of a 13-year-old. And then, coming into the United States is just a different way of seeing and being, trying to put myself in the eyes and shoes and in the mindset of the people here, and really having to seek to understand. And that skill has also helped me in the work I do in the Amazon.
Well, I think that's very similar to my own experience. I also immigrated to the United States from communist China. So I found myself having to adapt to a vastly different environment. Some 30 years ago, there was a huge gap between the US and China. So I've had to find myself also adapting to different situations and people. Atossa, in an earlier interview, you talk about having this aha moment when you first learned about the Gaia hypothesis by James Lovelock. Can you tell us what it is and why it really resonated with you?
Sure. Being an immigrant from Iran in high school in Akron, Ohio, which was not very tolerant of outsiders community, I ended up feeling like I didn't belong. I didn't have my identity. I was not convenient during the hostage crisis to be from Iran in a white Midwest town where you are the only foreigner in school. When I started college, I went to the International Students Club and met the people who became my best friends. And I received the Gaia hypothesis booklet. So James Lovelock put forward a theory that the Earth is a living entity, almost like a superorganism that is maintaining very narrow band of conditions that are important for life and able to react to the changes in order to keep those conditions conducive to life. And so this idea of Gaia, that great goddess of the earth, as a living being, the superorganism of which I am a cell in her body, I really had an aha moment that my identity, where I grew up, the countries, the nation states, those entities were all invented, and that really ultimately what mattered is that we were cells in the body of a living earth. We have a host. She
Right.
supports us, we support her. We are embedded in this other identity. Not only was an aha moment from a understanding my ontology of the way I see the world, but it was really a more convenient identity for who I really wanted to be, and not feeling like I'm an immigrant from Iran, but I'm living in America. Who am I? All of a sudden, those things fell away, and I was really understanding myself as part of a planet, of Gaia, of life, of a web of
Mm.
life. For me, it was both personal and ontological to connect with Gaia and the Gaia hypothesis. Pretty soon after that, I met one of my best friends who's half Peruvian and was studying conservation biology in the Amazon. A whole other world opened up to me. I learned about the Amazon. I'd never heard about the rainforest. And that later became an obsession. I couldn't stop thinking about the rainforest, talking about it, feeling like we had to do something. Like, who does people even know what the rainforest is and what's happening to Gaia, what's happening to the Amazon? And so that quest began to infiltrate my dreams. I literally had recurring dreams for 7 or 8 years before I could go travel to the Amazon and connect with the place and realize that this was my destiny. But for those many years, I felt like I was going crazy. I was having these dreams, I was having these obsessions. I couldn't find enough information. I couldn't get people to care or listen to what I was realizing. That we're one body, one earth, one Gaia. I like tuned into the frequency of the radio dial of the Amazon, and I was receiving her distress call, and I couldn't turn it off anymore. It had been a direct connect with my psyche, with my heart. And so that began a journey of like, what do I do? What do I do? What can I do? What can one person do? And it was an inquiry for many years until 1990 when a really good friend and mentor, they introduced me to the director of the Rainforest Action Network. And that was kind of another key moment where I like stepped into a gateway into my destiny, into my career.
Right. So, speaking of the Rainforest Action Network, prior to that, you had served as a conservation director for the city of Santa Monica in California, but you left the security of that job for a temporary contract and a nominal salary at the Rainforest Action Network. I know you were literally following your dreams, but can you tell us, did it feel like a huge leap of faith nonetheless?
Anytime you leave security for the unknown, you are taking a leap into the void. My affirmation's been that when I've done that, it's worked out. Luckily, it took courage, but my parents didn't understand quite what I was doing. I had this great job for the city of Santa Monica, and then later city of Anaheim, where I was doing the award-winning conservation programs for water and energy, which I also cared a lot about. And it had been right out of college. It was like the perfect job, a very important role at the moment. There was a drought in California. I was learning all
Mhm.
about the hydrological cycle. To leave for a 3-month contract for 20 hours a week, to leave my city job and all the benefits and all that. Yeah, my parents thought I was a little crazy, but it was one of those crossroads in your life where you're like, do I choose security or do I choose what I love? And I think I had such a strong sense that I didn't have any doubts. The doubts were from the people around me. The doubts were from my family, my friends, but it came not from me, from inside me. I was very clear. I was like, I'm going to find a way to align my work with Gaia and with the protection of the Amazon, because otherwise I may go mad, because like I was definitely
Right.
connected.
That's amazing. While at the Rainforest Action Network, you directed campaigns, among other achievements, that led to the ending clear-cut logging practices in Canada. So, Atossa, I know you're a very, very creative storyteller and a strategist. Can you give us an idea how you went about building some of these successful campaigns?
Well, I wouldn't say stop the clear cut logging in all of Canada. Just this one rainforest that where we fought and we won, and the next watersheds also. But really, it was one of the training grounds where I learned how to organize, how to campaign, And one of the things you realize is that British Columbia had these ancient rainforests. They're not tropical, they're temperate, but nonetheless they have 2,000-year-old trees and mycorrhizal network that is ancient and supports, this idea that the forest is alive and communicating. We didn't know all that back then, but what we did know is that this forest was very special. It was being cut down, clear cut logged for lumber that you could buy at Home Depot, or for pulp and paper, basically the phone books. Remember the old yellow page phone books?
Yes.
Those were made out of these ancient trees. Lots of organizations in British Columbia had thousands of people had gotten arrested blockading the logging of this ancient revered place in Clayoquot Sound in British Columbia. And at the time, I was working with the Rainforest Action Network. We received a caravan of activists with a big 1,000-year-old cedar tree stump on the back of a semi truck pulled through Los Angeles, and we started having protests in front of the phone company that was making the phone books. And we started a campaign calling "Don't Let Your Fingers Do the Chopping." And we went after those contracts. Greenpeace got involved, other organizations, activists in Clayoquot Sound, scientists, all of these groups came together. We basically went after the phone companies. I remember the late Tom Hayden, senator from California, calling me to a meeting with GTE, with one of the phone companies, where we really grilled them on their paper purchasing contracts. Eventually, we canceled those contracts after getting many peaceful, nonviolent, direct action, creative protests, things like showing up to their shareholder meetings. All of those things ended up leading to a series of contracts being canceled. We even went after National Geographic and New York Times because their paper was coming from these ancient forests. And once we canceled those contracts, the logging companies and the government was ready to meet with the First Nations, to meet with the environmentalists in Canada, and to meet with the international campaigners who were cutting off their money supply for these contracts. So we used market pressure and public pressure to get change. And eventually, the government agreed to stop giving the permit, and the company actually had to shut down its mill and leave that logging operation and leave the forest intact and reach an agreement. And that became the basis for the next campaign in British Columbia, which ended up creating the Great Bear Rainforest, which is one of the massive areas protecting intact watersheds. And it took about 20 years to protect this area. Basically, if you can think about a campaign that has local, national, international presence and strategies, and looks at the money, both who's investing, who's buying, and building a campaign across the supply chain to put economic and political pressure on the decision makers. And it worked. The lessons are that we have the power to organize all along the supply chain in order to influence the way the industry responds. Because a lot of companies like Pac Bell and New York Times saying, we want recycled, we want pulp and paper that comes from selective logging and sustainable forestry. But it took organizing in the forest as well as across the supply chain to shift the market, to catalyze what was already seen on the horizon. Those were, I would say, the lessons which I then took to the work I did in the Amazon.
We're going to talk more now about your home, which is the Amazon forest. It is the most biodiverse region on Earth, providing shelters to millions of species of plants and animals. And as you said, people often say that Amazon is the lung of the world because it absorbs 25% of carbon dioxide and it produces 20% of the world's oxygen. But indigenous wisdom says that it's also the heart of our planet. Can you tell us why it is also called the heart of our planet?
Sure, I love telling this story. I mean, stepping back, looking at the planet from space, we see the tropical rainforests cover an area that's about 3,000 miles wide all around the equator. It's like a green belt around the equator. And these rainforests are low pressure zones where moisture flows into these low pressure zones. The Amazon, being the largest rainforest on the planet, is basically a green ocean. It's pulling in the low pressure zone created in the forest, pull in the moisture from the atmosphere. Now, the aerosol particles from trees then nucleate those clouds, basically give them something for the raindrops to form around. Clouds rain on the Amazon. Then The trees, through their evapotranspiration, open their pores, sweat out water vapor, a lot of water vapor, like on average about 1,000 liters of water vapor per tree per day into the air. These geysers of water vapor form atmospheric rivers, circulating moisture deeper and deeper into the rainforest of South America, bringing rain all the way to like Argentina and southern Brazil, Uruguay. That whole region of southern Brazil gets 95% of its rain from those atmospheric rivers cycling out of the forest. And some of those rivers also hit the Andes and bring rain to the north, all the way to Mexico, California, the Sierra Nevada. For example, we know through modeling that if the Amazon forest collapses, if this hydrological system, this conveyor of moisture, this rain machine of the planet ceases to function, we will see a 50% drop in the water cycle in California, which is the breadbasket of the world and also the fifth largest economy on the planet, depends entirely on atmospheric rivers from the Amazon for its agricultural productivity. 70% of the GDP of the continent of South America depends on Amazon rain. So, the Amazon is literally the lifeline of South America, but also the rain machine for the whole planet. The largest river in the world is the Amazon River. It's about 20%, like I said, of the world's fresh water. That system also is lifting up a river 20% larger than the Amazon River into the sky every day. That's the size of the atmospheric river that the Amazon rainforest literally lifts into the sky. So what we're seeing is that the Amazon is actually pumping, cycling, circulating, cooling, driving rain. The science panel for the Amazon, of which I'm a member, calls the Amazon the heart of the biosphere. So the Amazon rainforest is the heart of the hydrological climatic system of our planet, of Gaia. There's been a lot of scientific research now that says the Amazon is in a downward spiral. It's beginning to collapse. That we're at a tipping point of no return. We thought it might be 10 or 15 years off, but it's actually happening now. We have evidence of that because last year the drought in the Brazilian Amazon, actually all over the Amazon, but really felt in Brazil, was the worst ever in 120 plus years of recorded history. And that drought allowed for parts of the Amazon River to be interrupted. The temperatures of the river rose, millions of fish died, also many dolphins, which are endangered, pink river dolphins that are endangered, also died. So the Amazon is experiencing this basically hydrological collapse. And we are literally at another important crossroad where if we don't get to zero deforestation really soon and begin a massive process of reforesting, what we estimate around 6% of the forest that's been already lost. We're talking about millions of acres of reforestation. The Amazon could tip to irreversible tipping point where we see a dieback of the forest, a reduction of the atmospheric rivers, and that's a positive feedback loop. Means it gets worse and worse until we could lose as much as 70% of the Amazon. That might take many decades from losing 70% of the Amazon, but the point of no return is now. That's why we have to reverse the current trend. We have to get to zero deforestation and reforest 6% of the areas that are degraded in order for the tree to continue to cycle and be that biotic pump that's basically the heart of the planet. Because what we can do now, we won't have a chance to do in a decade. The importance of the Amazon with maintaining our hydrological system and climate stability. And if you look at Paris climate goals, it's one of those tipping points that we must avoid. Otherwise, all the other planetary tipping points will be exacerbated. And there's no way of meeting like the Paris targets if we don't protect the Amazon. The Amazon is also one of the largest land-based carbon sinks. It's sequestering all that carbon. We lose the Amazon, it's really kind of game over for the planet. So I'm very passionate about the need to really organize now, because really every tree is basically taking us over the cliff. What we want to do is rise into the action at the last minute. And I know we can to get to zero deforestation and to mount massive reforestation in between now and 2030. Ultimately,
Yeah.
we have less than 5 years to do this.
Yeah. And that relates a lot to the work that you're doing now at Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance, which we'll get to at a later point. But I wanted to ask you, when you finally made it to the Amazon some years later, after this being obsessed about it for 7 or 8 years, what did you find there? Was it everything that you had dreamed about?
There were 2 trips within the first year. The first trip was amazing. It was just like drinking out of a fire hose. I was in the forest, receiving all of this knowledge, feeling all of these emotions, and experiencing the beauty and the viscerally experiencing it. And then on the second trip, we decided to go deeper into a deep forest excursion where we spent
Hmm.
about 10 days in a very remote area in Manu National Park. And that was a dream. And on that trip, I found myself in one of the landscapes I had dreamt about. Actually, I'd drawn diagrams of. And I'd been to this landscape many times in my dream, and there I was on this deep forest excursion, finding myself the landscape before me. The other thing that happened is we spent several days across the Andes into the jungle. We're driving down this really windy 1-lane road. We pulled over, and there above me, above this tree, I saw a harpy eagle. I saw its claws, and it was huge. And basically, I literally had to leave the tree walking backwards back up to the truck because I didn't want to turn my back to this giant animal with huge
Right.
claws. As soon as the truck turned on, the harpy eagle flew. And they're amazing. They're like the fastest, most ferocious animal of the Amazon. And literally the year before, I had 2 photos. One was a harpy eagle, and the other
Hmm.
was a jaguar. I had pinned the photos on next to my computer monitor. And so the harpy eagle flies down the road and lands in a tree about a kilometer down the road. We pass that point, takes off again, goes another kilometer or so down the road and sits on a tree. The entire way of winding down the mountain into the jungle, the harpy eagle led us. We were guided by this beautiful, magnificent animal. We eventually got into a river canoe and went downstream many hours to get to the wildlife refuge in Manu National Park. We're pulling out our tents to set up our camp, and a jaguar runs out of the river through the beach, right through the middle of our 2 rows of tents, and he goes into the forest. And it stops and looks back at us and then runs into the forest. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's the harpy eagle and the jaguar both on the same day of my entry into the deep forest. I think it was my 27th birthday. And it was just an aha moment again, like, okay, I am in the right place. And it was a very rare sighting, too. That our guide said, I do this trip every 2 weeks. I've never seen that.
So you were guided by both the eagle and the jaguar.
They were more like symbols or signs, you've arrived. I had all this desire to be there and connect. And I just organized a fundraiser for Rainforest Action Network where I dressed up as a harpy eagle a few months before. We called it the All Species Ball. So that whole journey showed me many signs that I should surrender to my path, not have doubts, not look back, and to know that there is this direct connection to the source. We're being guided. Trust this path and not look back.
It's a lovely story. So one thing I wanted to mention is there are between 350 to 400 indigenous tribes living in the Amazon forest across 9 countries. And I know you've been working almost all of your professional life with the indigenous community. And for those of us who are stuck living in the modern world, can you share with us their way of life, the challenges that they face from our extractive industries, and their perspective on the world around them?
Yeah, it's been a huge honor for me, a huge privilege. Every day I give thanks of my life's ability to be in service to Indigenous peoples the protection of their territories and cultures and way of life. And what I've received from those teachings has been enormous in my own understanding of the world. Indigenous peoples are about 4%, 5% of the world's population. But if you look at indigenous territories, the lands that indigenous peoples are either stewarding or have title to or are claiming, those areas represent about 80% of all biodiversity that still exists on the planet. So 5% of the population is stewarding about a fifth of all the land, but representing 80% of all life on the planet. So they play an outsized role in caring for Gaia. If we're talking about protecting the Amazon, about a third of the Amazon basin is land that indigenous peoples are either have title to or are in the process of getting title. And of course, all of the Amazon was once indigenous land. But those areas actually show lower deforestation rates than even national parks. So in the Amazon and many tropical countries, indigenous territories are a best chance we have to protect forests, the best chance we have to stop the encroachment of activities that are destructive to forests. And you say, well, why is that? Why is indigenous land so well preserved? I've come to understand that the ontological, the world view of indigenous peoples, the way they see the world, is probably why. You know, if you see the world as alive, if the forest is your kin, if all of the creatures in the forest are family, and that ultimately, if you're in service to this family of life, then of course you're going to be taking care of it. One of the things that I hear often from indigenous people I work with is that we're here to be good ancestors to the next many generations of all life, not just human life. So we're here to be good ancestors. That's a mantra that I haven't heard in the modern world, but maybe we need that mantra in the modern world. How are we being good ancestors to future generations? And how are we related to all life forms? A plant species, the bees, all of life is sacred. And that is a worldview that we have lost. We all once were indigenous. We all came from these cultures that were in reverence and reciprocity to their landscapes. We've lost that. Indigenous peoples are still maintaining that and are teaching us to remember that we were once in service to the web of life, and we've lost touch with that. Indigenous people see the earth. It's not just an intellectual thing. The earth is my mother. It's I feel the earth as my mother. I am in reverence to earth as my mother. The mountain is alive. I'm in reverence to this mountain, or to the river, which I see as the house of God. Those cosmological worldviews they're poetic, but they're also essential principles of living systems. The scientists are looking at how life forms, how it works, what is life, how does life flourish, how does it exist, and are basically giving us a lot of principles indigenous peoples have always articulated in their stories and cosmology, that life happens in communities, in ecosystems. Ecosystems are communities of life, a plant community, coral reef. These are communities of life that are mostly cooperative, although they have some competition, but mostly synergistic, and they cooperate to create more conditions for more life. Like life cooperates to create more life. That is the principle of living systems. And I think indigenous peoples just live in that system, in that worldview, without having it a scientific lens. They had a cultural, cosmological lens. So that's why it's been amazing. And also, what I see is indigenous peoples are taking huge risks, life and death battles, giving everything, sacrificing their own lives to defend their territory, defend what they consider sacred, defend future generations of our life. So I do think that they're playing an outsized role in our planet and maintaining life on this planet and teaching us wisdom. So I'm very excited about being a bridge and amplify the voices of those wisdom keepers who are reminding us we are all in this web. My colleague Yunkar, who you met, Domingo, he always says we're all in the same boat. If humanity, if climate, if disasters arrive here, if life goes extinct, we're all in the same boat. In a way, he is always reminding us that we need to chart a new path. And that's the work Indigenous people are offering the modern world. They're helping give us tools, but also traditional knowledge in the way we adapt to climate change. And also through their stories and their teachings, it's almost a beacon of light guiding us out of the current, well, probably crisis we're facing as humanity.
Oh, Atossa, I've yet to visit the Amazon, and I'm looking forward to taking that journey later this year, and hopefully I'll see my own jaguar and the eagle. I just also want to share about my own personal experience with the Indigenous people earlier this year. When the Indigenous people spoke and when they sang, I just cried. I can't explain it, but tears were just kept rolling down my face, and I couldn't stop for half an hour. I think I was feeling their suffering deeply. And it's part of what I came to understand, that we're all connected. What we do to others, we also actually do unto ourselves. So that was one of the takeaways that I had from meeting you and the people that you work with at Amazon Sacred Headwaters. But I do want to go back and ask you that in 1996, you founded Amazon Watch, which is a nonprofit organization focused on protecting the rainforest and advancing the rights of the Indigenous population. I wanted to know what inspired you to found Amazon Watch, or you might say it found you.
Yes. Well, first, I want to acknowledge what you said. That was a very powerful day. I remember that day being connected to this moment in history, that we're coming together in a place like Davos, which is mostly focused on money and financial and economic issues, and really bringing this deep message of life and reverence for life. It was very powerful. It was a very cosmic moment. So I also felt how important that moment was for us as a human race. So yeah, I can't wait for you to come to the jungle, sit with the forest and connect, get downloads from the forest. For me, I would say, the other thing to say is the sadness, the grief that we all feel, because the loss of life is what's happening to the dismemberment of the planet is painful. We're going through a mass extinction crisis right now. We're going through a climate crisis. If the earth is hurting, the organism's hurting, we as cells in the body are going to feel it. And so I just want to say that it's important to feel those feelings. I was in that one of those moments when I decided to start Amazon Watch, or maybe it found me. I was at the Rainforest Action Network, and I was receiving information about secret plan for the Amazon to build highways and roads and dams and power lines, and which is this idea of regional corridors for exports, creating arteries for global trade across the Amazon, connecting Brazil with all the other 11 countries in South America that Brazil borders, to ship resources to the global market. That was the vision for the Amazon. And it was in the mid 90s I started receiving information from Friends of the Earth Sweden and European colleagues saying, we've uncovered this plan and this is happening. It's not just some distant plan. They're having conferences to raise the money for this plan. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this can't happen. We have to address this. This will be the end of the Amazon. And I was going around to many organizations that I worked with, including my own, and saying, we need to scale up a campaign targeting these export corridors and these visions for infrastructure and investments for the continent. We need to shift that vision. We need to think of a different vision. And a lot of organizations looked at me saying, this is scary, this is horrible, but there's nothing we can do. We have full plates already, as most NGOs do at they've got 5-year plans and they've got budgets years ahead of time. So there was no room for expanding this work. So I decided I was going to do something, but I didn't know exactly what or how or what I was going to call it. And basically, I went to protest the Brazilian president who was speaking at Stanford. He was rolling back land rights and was getting an award at Stanford for being the honorary chair of the humanities department. And I just felt like we needed to do something at that moment. But I didn't have all the people on board with my organization. And as I was leaving, people were not ready to do an action at that day. And so I decided I was going to do the action myself. And during the protest, I took out my bullhorn and I confronted the president of Brazil face to face as he was leaving the auditorium. And, it was election year, so he had his jet full of reporters lined up as he's waving, walking out of the auditorium to his limousine. I confronted him with the bullhorn, and then he basically stopped to hear me and left. He left me with all the journalists. And
Yeah.
so I ended up having a press conference about the plan for the Amazon, which I only had an article from Time magazine at the time. I gave that out, and people said, "Oh, and what's your name and what's your organization?" And I realized that I didn't have the authorization of using the Rainforest Action Network, so I just made it up. I said, "I'm Atossa Soltani with Amazon Watch." I blurted it out, and the next day it was all over the media. And I was getting calls from reporters saying, "Tell me about Amazon Watch." And I'm like, "Well, it's a new organization founded yesterday." Anyway, and then I had to basically do what I had said, which is work on this massive plan for the changing the vision for the future of the Amazon to target these infrastructure projects and investments, change the development plan for the Amazon, and also create Amazon Watch. So that's how Amazon Watch started. In a spontaneous moment where really, again, feeling called, I was responding to a deeper call from the forest.
Yes. A higher calling because you
That's
were
right.
connected to Gaia. Now, I can only imagine, Atossa, as a female Iranian American leading an NGO working in a predominantly male patriarchal society in South America, the types of obstacles that you might have faced and overcome, which begs the question, as a non native and as a woman, how did you manage to earn the trust from the community over the years?
That's a great question. I mean, a lot of people show up in indigenous organizations, communities, etc., getting very excited, like I did, making commitments and promises, and some follow through and some don't. I think indigenous peoples have a really openness, a willingness to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
But often what ends up happening is people come, promise, and then eventually disappear, and it's very transient. So one of the commitments I made is that I was here for the long haul, that we
Mhm.
weren't just going to be flavor of the month. I think that the thing that I learned is consistency matters. Showing up day after day, year after year matters. And you build relationships. Building relationships are something that women are especially talented in doing. I think building trust, listening, deeply listening, not coming with my own ideas of what we need to do, but more like what's happening? How can I support what your vision is? Being humble in that, we don't know what's going to work. We
Right.
think we might know, but we don't always know. And that this is as much about building trust and building relationships for the long haul as it is a short-term gain or transaction or campaign. So I just been patient and consistent, and grateful that when you show up year after year, eventually there is trust, and you always have to work on keeping
Yes.
those trust relationships active. I think that's true for any career, any profession, any industry, that trust is our biggest currency, our biggest asset, and that comes with time and with consistent commitment. The Amazonian cultures are also very male, so it's taken a while, but it has helped indigenous women have it harder.
Mm.
Indigenous women have to work super hard, and they're super effective, and I'm really committed to the movement of indigenous women all over the Amazon basin. Makes me cry even thinking about it. They are taking huge risks. They are not compromising. They are being collaborative and not competitive. They're working well together, and they're building movements of women, of elders, of young women. I'm putting a lot of faith and also a lot of enthusiasm in the movement of indigenous women for protecting the Amazon. And I'm inspired every day by what they achieve. I think I had it a little bit easier that I'm not a total gringo and I'm not indigenous. So it's kind of like in that sweet spot of working with the men. But I think the most important thing is the results. You show up, you accompany them to the shareholder meeting of an oil company, and then you get the oil company to announce that they're leaving. I think those all build trust and build momentum of what is possible.
Yes.
And I think that's helped the work we do in the Sacred Headwaters.
Well, the commitment has been over 30 years now for you. It's really, really
Yeah.
impressive. And I understand that Indigenous leaders and environmental defenders are being killed every year in the Amazon. I was wondering, Atossa, were you ever scared that your life would be in danger?
Yeah, I mean, the indigenous people in the Amazon are facing life and death battles. We are very aware that consequences of their resistance, there's been record number of people, especially during the years of Bolsonaro, that were killed, especially indigenous and community leaders, environmental leaders in Brazil, but also in Colombia, in Peru, recently in Ecuador, we've had indigenous leaders killed. And I think that it is a very serious matter, the human rights violations that indigenous peoples face and the risks they take to stand up to illegal loggers, illegal mining companies backed by drug cartels. It is just crazy, the risks that they face. I've always been guided by indigenous people when I'm in their forest. So, knock on wood, I haven't felt directly threatened. I'm not there day to day. I'm not also going to high conflict areas. And I only go when indigenous people tell me, you're invited, we're going to accompany you, and we'll be your guides. I'm not going places on my own. But I will say that there's been many tragedies, including someone who I worked closely with who was kidnapped and killed. 3 people were kidnapped and killed in Colombia in 1999, and that was hugely painful for our movement. We were working with the Uwa people of Colombia who were fighting an oil company, Occidental Petroleum from Los Angeles, and we were working hard to get Oxy out. The young man who was basically working as an interpreter and bridge, an ambassador for the Uwa, and 2 indigenous women went to visit the Uwa. They were kidnapped and killed in 99 by the guerrillas. And some of the reasoning that we could ascertain was that the oil project was a source of income for the violent guerrilla groups. And it was a life or death matter for the people who ended up standing in the way of that project. And what we learned is that it's not a rare occasion that indigenous people and local communities are murdered for money or for making way for the industrial projects, and that ultimately we need stronger human rights protections. So there are now global agreements like the Escazú Agreement, which was a convention that was signed a few years ago in Escazú, Costa Rica, that basically commits governments to ensuring human rights of earth defenders and movement leaders. And we really need to do better in all over the world protecting earth defenders and making it a crime, putting funding into enforcement, putting funding into investigating and punishing those who perpetrate murder. Right now, they get away with it, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And we need to have stronger sanctions on those who are funding and those who are committing these crimes need to be brought to justice in order to reduce pressures on the local front lines.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I thought it was an important point to bring to light because we don't hear about it very often, or at least on my side of the world. I want to mention that I came across a video on the website of Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance. It's called Amazonia 2041, A Vision from the Future. And I really enjoyed watching the 9-minute film because it took me on a journey set in the future, 2041, and looking back at how an indigenous led movement succeeded in permanently protecting the headwaters bioregion. And I found it both daring and imaginative and a very powerful way to communicate about what is possible, because very often we're caught in this negative feedback loop of geopolitical uncertainty and climate and biodiversity disasters that we're facing. Watching that video gave me so much hope. But in order to make this grand vision possible, Atossa, in your opinion, what needs to shift? Is it our collective consciousness? Do we need a new value system in place? Like, what needs to happen, right? Because like you said, unlike the indigenous people, we in the modern society, we don't understand this connection that we have to Gaia. So what needs to shift in order to realize this grander vision, not just in the Amazon, but in other parts of the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's the real dilemma we're in. The modern world is so focused on materials, accumulation, a life that's based on basically financial gain. So much of our culture is focused on our consumption and our financial gain that we are at risk. We're putting everything at risk. So, yeah, I do think that we do need to shift our values. We need to shift our worldviews. One of my mentors was a systems thinker named Donella Meadows. She's passed on now, but she wrote a book about thinking in systems. She would say there are different points of leverage in a system. We first have to see the system. We have to see that we're in an economic system, a governance system, a value system that's maintaining the current goals of the system. To change the system, we actually have to change the goals of the system. That's a key part of changing the system because everything organizes to meet the system goals. Right now, from a global perspective, the system goal is an economic system that basically gives primacy to money. Money trumps all other values. Everything's driven by the value of money. And that's what we've got right now in the world is in service to that system. To change the system, we have to change the system goals. And that's where she would say, in the part of the Amazon that we're working on, indigenous cosmology is about the idea of harmony. They're not so much focused on the word development. The idea of development is not something that they relate to. What they have been saying to us is that ultimately well-being is a concept that's collective. Collective harmony and well-being should be the primary goal, not money, wealth. Some countries like Bhutan are looking at happiness instead of the gross domestic product. Their drumbeat is happiness. There are countries that are adopting well-being index, like New Zealand, saying we're going to prioritize our budgeting, our government's policies around well-being. And so we need the new system goals. The other thing Donella Meadows would say is the hardest thing to change is the paradigm that created the goals. That's the hardest to change, but that's the change that ultimately will lead to the greatest results, especially if we're in the predicament we're in where we have polycrisis. We need to change a paradigm. And the idea of paradigm is like oxygen. We don't see it, we don't notice it, but it's everywhere. It's what influences the way we see the world. And right now we're seeing the world from a materials perspective, but if indigenous people invite us to see it from more of a holistic perspective of that life is sacred. Gaia is alive. We are part of her. We are not fighting for nature. We are nature fighting for itself. We are the cells in the body of Gaia that is organizing, self-organizing to get us out of what we have, which is Gaia has an autoimmune disease. We have parts of the body attacking itself right now. That's what war is. That's what domination is. That's what ecological collapse and destruction come from. This idea of, parts of the system not seeing the full system and destroying itself. So Danella Meadows would invite us to really think about the paradigm that created the system. And what does that mean for every day? I would say it just means that we become people who see ourselves as an important part of Gaia, that we have a host and that we're in service to that host, and we find a way to make a living. We become people who put the web of life first and foremost, and being in service to the web of life is how we make our living. If it's working for wildlife, if it's working for the forests and rivers and clean air, it's most likely working well for every other part of the organism too, including humans. We've been trained to see it as economy or the environment. We've created these artificial dichotomies. So becoming people who are coming from this holistic perspective and holding the vision that there is a way to have mutually beneficial, mutually enhancing, mutual flourishing between the human and the rest of the natural world. That ontological shift is what we ultimately need to change our values and to change our behavior. But there's many things we can do. Like I said, nature can give us a lot of clues, a lot of the answers. I'm a big fan of biomimicry and the Biomimicry Institute and the work of seeing nature as the most intelligent, creative engineer, artist, architect, designer, inventor. Nature, Janine Benyus would say, has 3.8 billion years of R&D. You know, this idea that nature's figured out how to make elegant solutions without chemicals that are harmful, without high energy use, that is mostly solar, all
Yeah.
of this productivity. Nature gives us huge amounts of biological productivity with solar power, solar energy. I mean, in fact, remember I told you about the atmospheric rivers? Science panel and Marina Silva say it would take the collective output of 55,000 Itaipu dams. Itaipu Dam is the second largest dam in the world. It would take 55,000 Itaipu Dam's outputs in order to replicate the energy that the Amazon uses every day to put up the atmospheric rivers in the sky. It is possible to borrow from nature's principles, nature's ingenuity, nature's genius to design our human systems, our buildings, our products, economic system. So our economic system is very much about concentration of wealth by fewer and fewer people. But the size of total capital markets collectively is exponentially growing year after year. And it's exponentially growing because the value is being extracted from the forests, from the oceans, from nature. That infinite growth is basically killing the planet. So every year we're producing more, extracting more, and creating more waste. And that total throughput into the system is part of what we need to bring into balance. And if we are able to, change the way we relate to our own well-being and our materials economy, and coming from a place of basically living systems, we can look to nature and look, wow, nature does it with zero waste, so
Yes.
distributedly and so elegantly. Why don't we use some of those lessons in redesigning the human systems to be mimicking nature's genius?
So, speaking of mimicking nature's way, I know that you've been working on this documentary called The Flow about the art of aligning with nature's ways. And flow is a term that was coined by an American psychologist, Nihai Csikszentmihalyi, back in, I think, 1990. And it's about this highly focused, heightened state of consciousness where people experience deep enjoyment and creativity. I sometimes feel flow or feel like I'm in a flow state when I'm preparing for a podcast. So, can you tell us a little bit about this project that you're working on and all the people that you're interviewing?
It's been in the works for many years, and we're hoping to bring in the finishing funds to get it through to the final cut. But yeah, it's been an amazing passion project led by Louis Fox, a brilliant thinker and media genius. And the idea is actually coming back from your lands, Chinese philosophy of Tao, being this idea that nature has a way. There's a way that water flows through the landscape. There's a way that things reveal themselves, that things unfold in nature, and that we can be learning nature's lessons and embodying them in our day-to-day lives and realizing that, we are nature.
Yes.
So this ancient philosophy that was brought by, people like Zhang Liang Wang, who is one of
Yes.
the key people in our film, interviewing him, doing Tai Chi and calligraphy and talking about flow. It's a poetic way of saying, humans, we have just been too absorbed in the material, in the thinking mind. The macaws are in agreement.
Love that. Love that. He's in
That
agreement, I think.
that ultimately we need to step out of our thinking mind and get into this idea of nature's genius flowing through us, that all creativity is essentially a transmission of nature and and us being nature. And so, yeah, and the flow state being this place where we're most creative, most turned on. And we interview surfers and musicians and people like Erica Badu and bike messengers, surfers and agriculturalists and sailors. who all talk about sort of these principles, nature's principles, and how they show up in their creativity and in their way of life. It's a big reframe of seeing ourselves not so much from an anthropocentric worldview, but from nature's way. And it's also really to enlighten people into the ways that solutions can come from that part of the paradigm. You know, if we can elegant solutions from nature that are in alignment with nature's principles, that we're going to find much more harmony. And so this is really inviting us to lean into nature for our own creativity and for creative solutions like permaculture, like biomimicry.
So, Atossa, you seem to be someone who's very, very connected to Mother Earth, and you're deeply immersed working with the indigenous communities in South America. So, and I was wondering if you would mind telling us about some of your spiritual practices.
Sure. I'm immersed in a region of the Ecuadorian Amazon that is, they call themselves dream cultures. These are indigenous cultures that for thousands of years have had this deep reliance on their dreams and visions for how they live their lives and the decisions they make every day. And I find that ironic because, as I said to you, for about 8 years, was having dreams, and like my dreams led me to this place. And now I'm working with the people who call themselves dream cultures. Every morning they awaken between 2 or 3 in the morning, and they have a dream council, where they drink tea and share their dreams, talk about collectively what those dreams mean, and make their decisions. Sometimes I have a dream and they're like, the dream is so clear that I'm not going to go hunting today because something bad would happen if I went. And other times the dream is, okay, we're going to have this really important meeting with the government. There's going to be some provocation. We should be ready for that provocation. And here's what my dream told me about how to respond to that provocation. So it's also a guidance. These cultures have taught me that so much of what we need to know we're receiving from this collective intelligent field, whether that collective field comes through your intuition or your dreams. We must take it seriously. And ultimately, if you look at incredible interviews like Einstein, the person who figured out how to get the Mars rover to Mars, all these people talk about they spent decades trying to problem solve with their thinking mind, and then they had a dream and the answer came to them in the dream. Well, that process is also something we talk about in the movie Flow. That process is something that I've found to be very true for me. I feel like I have to write down my dreams. I have to look for the answers. I have to ask the right questions. So I think that's a deeply spiritual practice, being connected to your dreams and visions. Of course, I've been part of spiritual ceremonies with tobacco, with ayahuasca, with psilocybin. Those have been really moments of profound connection to getting instructions from Gaia. And sometimes they're very personal, for my own healing, or my own well-being. Sometimes they're just explanation of things I'm struggling with, because we all go through moments of trauma or moments of pain. And I think other spirituality has been about getting strength and clarity. And, through ceremony, through connecting with plants, through connecting with landscapes. But the ceremonies I've done are very few and far between. The daily practice of remembering our dreams and meditating and creating a connection with nature. And then, of course, other things you love. Like for me, my deep spiritual practice is salsa dancing. I come alive, my mind calms down. I get into my body, I get into a flow state, and I feel truly giddy. And that's a spiritual practice too, as well.
It's moving meditation. Actually, I wanted to tell you, I also participate in a dream circle. It's really amazing. One of your favorite books, Atossa, is a book called The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist, founder of the Pachamama Alliance. And the book examines our attitude towards money and offers, I think, surprising insights into our lives and also how we've structured our society. And I was wondering, having had to fundraise over the years, how has your relationship with money evolved?
Lynn Twist's book, Soul of Money, really resonated with me. She sees money as energy, talking about the principles of flow, this idea of circulation. I have been thinking a lot about the parallels between the money system and the destruction of our planet
Yes.
But then also the parallels between the money system and water. We even
Mm.
call money currency, liquidity. All of our analogies about our money system are formed around water.
Yeah.
You have the money system that's basically growing exponentially and pooling in bigger and bigger and bigger funds, which are basically
Right.
destroying nature, converted into money, money concentrating. And then we're looking for ways for money to do good, but even that can be tricky because it can disrupt the system. And
Right.
in the water system, what we see is water is concentrating because of climate change, and because of the hydrological cycle has been disconnected from all the forests and landscapes and all the places where water would have circulated. We've lost half the world's rainforest.
Right.
So
Right.
these huge pools of water into the atmosphere that are pooling in bigger and bigger, like hurricanes, like creating droughts and deluges, creating stagnation. Water that's stagnated becomes toxic. I can see the parallels between the fluidity and the damaging way the money flows, and then the climate and habitat destruction is causing our water system to flow.
Yeah.
But we also can keep in mind what is a healthy water system. How does it flow? How does it nourish? How does it
Hmm.
distribute? In a lot of Tao philosophy, the goal was to slow down water through your landscape. It could do a lot of good, but when it was a deluge or
Hmm.
a fast moving, then it could do damage. And so that's been present with me in terms of my personal relationship with money. I think, I came from a background of, my family left Iran and didn't have any more income making. They didn't have more income. They had to
Yeah.
live off their savings and barely make it. My mom had a lot of fear around whether we were going to have enough
Yeah.
to live. And my dad had a different attitude. He had kind of a philosophical attitude that
Hmm.
if you let money flow, it keeps flowing. And so I kind of got a little bit of both, I think. I think for me, I resonated more with my dad's philosophy that,
Yeah.
you be generous and others will
Hmm.
be generous to you,
Back. Yeah.
and so I've tried to be that way. And I know there's definitely times where like, oh my gosh, we need more funding for all of the things that are happening and the money isn't coming or it's late. I don't want to get in a place of fear or scarcity. I
Yes.
always tell my colleagues if we are in too much scarcity mindset, we repel money, that we have to be in
That's right.
positive, we have to start giving thanks for the money's about to come.
Yes.
That's kind of my fundraising hat on. I'm like, I'm giving thanks today for the money that's about to arrive, but we're working hard to raise money because we are in incredible opportunities to have huge difference, to stop a road, to stop a mine,
Yes.
to build a food system, to help empower women, to educate the young people, to title territory, to create livelihood fish farms so that they're less dependent on the contaminated fish from oil drilling. So many reforestation, food system. We are doing so much that deserves that rain. The
Mm.
rain that the Amazon gives to the world. We want the world to rain back to us so that
Mm.
we can continue to maintain the life support systems of the planet. But my feeling is to be ready and believing that it's coming.
I love that abundant. I actually grew up with the scarcity mindset because, coming as an immigrant, I had that. But it wasn't until I started reading the book that I realized that actually money influences so many things, a lot of our behaviors. But we take it for granted. At the beginning of the story, she talks about this young man who coming from Achua tribe, right? Like he's never had to deal with money. And then all of a sudden he came to the United States to learn English, to study our modern ways of life. And then he's realizing, oh, okay, actually, this is what moves the society. So, like you said, it's a currency, right? It moves us around because the value of our society right now, it's built on money. It's built on money.
Yeah,
So,
money trumping all other values. And I think
yes,
that the creative thinking we're doing now is how do we harness money in service to life?
yes,
Right now, nature is in service to money.
yeah,
Our economic system is extracting nature in service to money. How do we get those huge pools of funds to be more distributed, to not only be driven by making more money, to be
right.
having bottom line around ecological vitality? My index of my funds are that they're they're not only making a financial return, but they're actually making ecological returns.
Yeah, we need to unlock that natural capital, and I wish you the best of luck with Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance. Atossa, we're now coming to the end of our interview, and as you know, we end every episode with a quote. And for this episode, we have a quote from Dr. Jane Goodall, an English primatologist and anthropologist. Only when our clever brain and our human heart work together in harmony can we achieve our true potential. So, Atossa, I want to thank you very much for coming on the Founder Spirit podcast today and sharing with us the important messages from the Amazon rainforest, the very heart of our planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely to talk to you.
If this podcast has been beneficial or valuable to you, feel free to become a patron and support us on patreon.com. That is patreon.com/thefounderspirit. And as always, you can find us on Apple, Google, Amazon, and Spotify, as well as social media and our website at thefounderspirit.com. I'm partnering with the Wheeler Institute, a nonprofit foundation focused on accelerating the transition to a net zero economy in restoring planetary health.